thinking they're thinking money, of course, and I understand that. But I'm thinking entirely different. You know, this was a home, a beautiful home, and it was never going to happen. It was never going to be sold, ever, ever.
Everything you think you know about Priscilla Presley and Graceland is a lie. And I'm about to prove it to you with documents that will completely shatter the narrative she's been feeding the world for over a year. The headline screamed, "Priscilla Presley takes control of Graceland and Elvis's widow fights to protect family legacy." But here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you. Priscilla Presley doesn't control Graceland. She never took control of Graceland. In fact, she's been fighting desperately to get back even the smallest piece of influence over the empire she helped build, and she's been losing that fight spectacularly. The woman who's been positioning herself as the protective guardian of Elvis's memory, she's actually been locked out of every major decision about Graceland for over a year now. The person who really controls everything, and I mean everything, is Riley Keough, Priscilla's own granddaughter. And the legal documents prove that Riley has more power over Elvis's legacy than Priscilla could ever dream of having again. So why has Priscilla been lying about this? Why has she been doing interviews talking about protecting Graceland when she legally can't protect anything? Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that she got completely outmaneuvered by a 33-year-old actress while she was grieving her daughter's death. Let me break down what really happened in January 2023, because the story you heard is complete fiction. When Lisa Marie Presley died suddenly, the media reported that there was a battle for control of the estate between Priscilla and Riley. They made it sound like two equal parties fighting for power, with Priscilla eventually winning some kind of victory. Complete nonsense. There was never a battle. There was a massacre. Riley Keough came prepared with legal documents that gave her total control, and Priscilla showed up with nothing but questions about signatures and forged paperwork. The outcome was never in doubt, but Priscilla's people have been spinning it like she had some kind of victory. Here's what actually happened in those courtrooms. Riley presented ironclad legal documents establishing her as the sole trustee of everything Lisa Marie left behind. Priscilla challenged the authenticity of the signatures, claiming they were forged. The court sided with Riley. End of story. Priscilla lost everything, and Riley walked away with complete control of a $100 million empire. But instead of admitting defeat, Priscilla's camp started this elaborate PR campaign to make it look like she was still relevant, still involved, still protecting Elvis's legacy. They leaked stories about her taking control of Graceland. They arranged interviews where she talked about her role in preserving Elvis's memory. They created this entire fiction that she was somehow sharing power with Riley. Why would they do this? Because the alternative was admitting that Elvis's widow, the woman who spent 40 years building his legacy, had been completely sidelined by her own granddaughter. That's not a story that makes Priscilla look good. That's a story that makes her look like she got played by someone half her age. The most twisted part is how they've been using Elvis's memory to cover up Priscilla's humiliation. Every time she does an interview, she talks about protecting Elvis, honoring his legacy, making sure Graceland stays true to his vision. But she's not protecting anything. She can't protect anything. She doesn't have the legal authority to make a single decision about how Elvis's name gets used or how Graceland operates. Riley Keough owns it all. Riley decides what happens to Elvis's image. Riley controls the licensing deals. Riley determines how Graceland functions. Riley even gets to decide where Priscilla will be buried when she dies. And Priscilla? She gets to smile for the cameras and pretend she's still relevant while her granddaughter holds all the power. The lie isn't just about control of Graceland. The lie is about Priscilla's entire role in Elvis's legacy going forward. She's been selling herself as the guardian of his memory when she's actually just a bystander watching someone else make all the decisions. And the worst part? She's been doing it so convincingly that most people still think she has influence over the Elvis empire. But the legal documents don't lie, and what they reveal about who really controls Graceland will shock you. Let me show you exactly what those legal documents say, because when you see the actual language, you'll understand why Priscilla has been lying about her role. These aren't just inheritance papers. These are documents that give Riley Keough more control over Elvis Presley's legacy than Elvis himself ever had. Riley doesn't just own Graceland, she owns the entire Elvis Presley enterprise. Every licensing deal, every commercial use of his name, every product with his face on it, Riley gets the final say. When Netflix wants to make an Elvis documentary, they don't call Priscilla, they call Riley. When a company wants to use Love Me Tender in a commercial, Priscilla's opinion doesn't matter, Riley decides. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. The documents specify that Riley has sole and absolute discretion over all business decisions related to the Elvis brand. Sole and absolute. That means she doesn't have to consult anyone. She doesn't have to consider anyone else's input. She can wake up tomorrow and decide to license Elvis's image for toilet paper commercials, and nobody can stop her. Think about what that means for Priscilla. She spent 4 decades carefully managing Elvis's image, making sure his legacy stayed dignified, ensuring that his memory wasn't cheapened by tacky commercial deals. All of that careful work, all of that protective instinct, all of that experience, completely irrelevant now. Riley can override 40 years of Priscilla's judgment with a single signature. And Graceland itself? Riley doesn't just own the house. She owns the entire operation. The tours, the gift shops, the restaurants, the special exhibits, everything that generates the millions of dollars in revenue every year. She can change how the tours work. She can decide what parts of the house visitors can see. She can alter the entire experience that millions of Elvis fans have when they make their pilgrimage to Memphis. Priscilla went from being the person who decided how Elvis's most sacred space was presented to the world to being someone who can't even influence what's in the gift shop. That's not just losing control. That's being completely erased from decision-making about something you created. But the most brutal part of these documents is what they say about Priscilla's future. Remember, Riley gets to decide whether Priscilla can be buried in Graceland's meditation garden when she dies. The exact language says Riley will, to the extent of her authority, allow Priscilla to be buried in the garden. To the extent of her authority. That's not a guarantee. That's Riley having the power to decide whether Elvis's widow deserves to rest beside him. Let me put this in perspective. Elvis and Priscilla were married. They had a child together. She lived in that house. She opened it to the public so fans could connect with his memory. She spent decades as the primary guardian of his legacy. And now her own granddaughter gets to decide whether she's worthy of spending eternity next to the man she loved. The documents even specify exactly where Priscilla can be buried if Riley allows it. At the location closest to Elvis without moving existing graves. Riley controls the real estate, even in death. She gets to decide how close Priscilla gets to Elvis, whether that spot is respectful or just an afterthought. This isn't just about money or business control. This is about the power to shape how one of America's greatest cultural icons is remembered forever. And that power doesn't belong to his widow anymore. It belongs to someone who wasn't even born when Elvis died. Riley can decide what stories get told about Elvis. She can choose which documentaries get made. She can determine what aspects of his life get emphasized or hidden. She controls the narrative about Elvis Presley's legacy, and she can write Priscilla completely out of that story if she wants to. The legal documents make it crystal clear. Riley Keough has more power over Elvis's memory than anyone in history, including Elvis himself. And Priscilla? She's reduced to hoping her granddaughter stays generous enough to let her have opinions about the legacy she's spent her life protecting. That's the real reason Priscilla has been lying about taking control of Graceland. Because admitting the truth means admitting she's been completely powerless, while someone else holds the keys to her life's work. Once you understand that Priscilla has zero legal power over Elvis's legacy, her behavior over the past year starts to make perfect sense. Every interview, every public statement, every media appearance, It's all been one massive campaign to stay relevant in a world where she's been completely sidelined. Look at what she's been doing since losing that court battle. She's been giving interviews talking about her role in protecting Graceland, making statements about preserving Elvis's memory, positioning herself as the wise elder who's guiding the family legacy. But here's what's really happening. She's trying to create influence through public pressure since she has no legal authority left. The most obvious example is how she's been handling the burial issue. In interviews, she talks about being confident she'll be buried at Graceland, saying things like, "I don't know why she wouldn't be buried at Graceland if she wants to be." She's trying to make it sound like it's a given, like, of course she'll rest beside Elvis. But we've seen the legal documents. Riley has complete discretion over that decision, and Priscilla is basically campaigning for her own burial spot through the media. Think about how humiliating that must be. You're 78 years old. You were married to Elvis Presley. You spent 4 decades building his legacy, and now you're doing interviews hoping to pressure your granddaughter into letting you be buried next to your husband. That's not the behavior of someone who has control. That's the behavior of someone who's desperate and knows it. The media manipulation has been incredible to watch. Priscilla's people have been strategically leaking stories about her involvement in Graceland decisions, her input on Elvis projects, her collaboration with Riley. They're creating this fiction that she's still part of the decision-making process when legally she has no more say than any random Elvis fan. And when that doesn't work, she tries the emotional manipulation route. She talks about being Lisa Marie's mother, about understanding Elvis better than anyone, about having lived through the peak of his career. She's essentially arguing that experience and emotional connection should matter more than legal documents. But courts don't care about your feelings. They care about what's written on paper. Riley Keough was born in 1989. Elvis died in 1977. She has no personal memories of the man, no lived experience of his impact on culture, no understanding of what made him special beyond what she's read in books or heard from family stories. Yet, she's the one deciding how his legacy gets commercialized, how his image gets used, and how his story gets told to future generations. Think about what that means for the authenticity of Elvis's memory. The decisions about his legacy are no longer being made by someone who loved him, lived with him, and understood his vision. They're being made by a Hollywood actress who inherited control through legal documents. That's not preservation. That's corporate management of a cultural icon. And here's where Priscilla's lies become really damaging. By pretending she still has influence, she's giving fans false hope that someone who actually knew Elvis is still protecting his memory. When people see her interviews, they think the Elvis legacy is in good hands. They don't realize that the person making the real decisions is someone who views Elvis as a business asset rather than a cultural treasure. The licensing deals that are already happening prove this point. Since Riley took control, we've seen Elvis's image used in ways that would have horrified Priscilla during her years of careful management. Commercial partnerships that cheapen his memory, product endorsements that have nothing to do with his music, marketing campaigns that treat him like a generic celebrity brand rather than a cultural icon. But because Priscilla keeps doing interviews talking about protecting his legacy, fans don't realize how dramatically the approach to Elvis's memory has changed. They think someone who cares about preservation is still in charge, when actually it's someone who cares about profit maximization. The future of Graceland itself is equally concerning. Riley has the power to completely change how the house operates, what stories get told during tours, what artifacts get displayed, and what parts of Elvis's life get emphasized. She could decide to focus more on the commercial aspects of his career and less on the personal stories that made him relatable to fans. She could change the entire experience to maximize revenue rather than honor memory. And Priscilla can't stop any of it. She can give all the interviews she wants about preserving Elvis's authentic legacy, but she has zero legal authority to actually preserve anything. Her public statements are just noise, while the real decisions get made by someone else entirely. The most tragic part is that Elvis's fans don't know this. They see Priscilla's interviews and think she's still the guardian of his memory. They trust that someone who loved Elvis is still making Elvis. The most pathetic part is how she's been trying to position herself as the voice of Elvis's true legacy. She does interviews talking about what Elvis would have wanted, how he would have felt about certain decisions, what his vision was for Graceland. But she's not speaking from a position of authority anymore. She's speaking from a position of desperation, trying to use Elvis's memory as leverage against her own granddaughter. Riley, meanwhile, has been handling this masterfully. She doesn't engage with Priscilla's media games. She doesn't respond to the passive-aggressive comments. She just keeps making business decisions, while Priscilla campaigns for relevance in interviews. It's like watching someone with actual power deal with someone who only has media access. The legal challenges have been equally unsuccessful. Priscilla's team has tried multiple angles to regain some control, questioning the validity of documents, challenging specific clauses, arguing for family consultation requirements. Every single attempt has failed because the original legal documents were too well crafted. Riley's lawyers made sure she had bulletproof control. What's really telling is how Priscilla's messaging has evolved. Early on, she was challenging the legitimacy of Riley's control, questioning signatures, talking about forged documents. When that didn't work, she shifted to talking about collaboration and working together. Now she's basically reduced to hoping that public pressure will make Riley more generous with her decision-making. But here's the reality that Priscilla refuses to accept. Riley doesn't need her approval, her input, or her blessing. Riley has complete legal authority to make whatever decisions she wants about Elvis's legacy, and no amount of media manipulation is going to change that. The saddest part is watching Priscilla try to maintain dignity while begging for scraps of influence over something she used to control completely. Every interview is basically her saying, "Please remember that I matter," while the legal documents prove that she doesn't. That's not protecting Elvis's legacy. That's protecting her own ego while pretending she still has power she lost over a year ago. So now that you know the truth about who really controls Elvis's legacy, let's talk about what this means for the King of Rock and Roll's memory going forward. Because Priscilla's lies aren't just about protecting her own ego. They're actively damaging how Elvis's story gets told to the world. When Priscilla does interviews talking about preserving Elvis's authentic legacy, she's creating confusion about who actually has the power to do that preserving. Fans hear her statements and think she's still the guardian of Elvis's memory. They believe she's still making decisions about how his story gets told. But the reality is that every major decision about Elvis's legacy is being made by someone who didn't even know him personally. What we're witnessing is the corporate takeover of a cultural icon, disguised as family legacy preservation. Riley Keough isn't protecting Elvis's memory. She's managing his brand. And every time Priscilla pretends she still has influence over that process, she's helping to hide the truth from the fans who deserve to know what's really happening to their hero's legacy. The Elvis that millions of fans around the world fell in love with wasn't just a rock and roll icon. He was a symbol of authenticity, heart, and Southern soul. He was real. He was vulnerable. He stayed connected to his roots, to the people who raised him, and to the fans who made him a legend. But the version of Elvis that exists today, the one mass-marketed and managed like a theme park attraction, is a far cry from the man who once sang gospel songs to his mother in their humble Memphis home. Today, the Elvis brand has been transformed into just another shiny Hollywood product. It's controlled not by someone who lived through the Presley story with love and understanding, but by Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter, who, despite her bloodline, inherited the reins of the empire more through legal maneuvering than heartfelt stewardship. And while many fans still believe that Priscilla Presley has a guiding hand in preserving Elvis's memory, that belief has been shaped by misleading public statements. In reality, her influence has quietly faded. And yet, she allowed the illusion to remain. That's not just a betrayal of Elvis's family legacy. It's a betrayal of the millions who trusted that someone close to him, someone who knew the man, would always be guarding his truth. What fans got instead was a corporate rebranding effort, disguised as the gentle advice of a protective grandmother. Elvis gave the world his heart. He deserved better than a boardroom legacy. And so do the fans who've stood by him for decades. If this revelation about who really controls Graceland shocked you, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we're uncovering more celebrity family betrayals you won't believe. Now tell us in the comments, does Priscilla deserve to lose control of Elvis's legacy?